This is the New Indians special series from Moscow. And today we have with us Andrey Bystritskiy. He has been in Russian media for a very long time. He has also authored some of the most important books on culture and intelligentsia of Russia. In fact, he wrote on the Russian intelligentsia during the demise of Soviet era. Welcome to Reason, the New Indians platform where we get to the reason behind the issues that concern you. Welcome, sir. So, I'm going to begin this conversation with the question of Russia for a very long time was under Soviet Union regime. And the rest of the world thought of Soviet Union as a system, as a nation without any culture. Was that true?
Russia has a relatively long story. Not very long, like India or China, for instance, or Roman Empire, but relatively long. And of course, Russian culture, Russian history is very interesting. Of course, like other cultures, Russian culture is very complicated. There are a lot of contradiction in each culture. Now we can see so-called cancel culture. It's very serious and interesting thing because, of course, we should rethink our situation and to answer on most important questions: who we are, where are we going, and so on and so on. It's a serious challenge. From my point of view, Russian culture is very specific due to some reason. First of all, because Russia is a very big country, and it could be explanation for many features of Russian culture. Peter Sorokin, very famous Russian sociologist, he was expelled from Russia at early 20th of previous century, and it was a result of decision of Communist Party, so-called philosophical ship, in reality a few ships. And later he was founder of United States sociology and so on. So he's extremely important person. He wrote about Russian culture and Russian history. He mentioned many years ago, forget about discussion with taxi drivers about culture and so on and so on. Pay attention on facts. Russian population has got biggest territory in the world during many years. It's important.
But tell me, during the Soviet era, wasn't there an effort to actually destroy the culture?
Russian population experienced cancel culture earlier than our contemporary US citizens, because communists decided to cancel Russian culture.
Yes.
Yes.
And you are seeing the same cancel culture in the United States of America.
Yes,
today.
but in Russia it took place 100 years ago, maybe more.
And that was not under democracy. America is a democracy right now, and this cancel culture is happening within the capitalistic American democracy.
Yes, but it's a big and serious question. What is democracy? What is democracy? Because even in ancient time, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, they wrote about some flaws of democracy. There are some problems. And I'm not sure that in the United States we see democracy. I think it's a sort of aristocracy, because Clintons and Bidens It's a top level of.
So they are aristocrats.
Yeah, definitely aristocrats. Yes, they are not dukes or counts, but they are aristocrats. And it's a big question. India is a big country, more than 1 billion population. Of course, it's a big question. How we can rule, how we can manage such kinds of societies? How we can give real rights to the population? What is the purpose of democracy? Actually, the experience of big democracy is very short, maybe 50 years. In the United States, black people got rights, it seems to me, in some states 50 years ago, maybe less. Ladies in Great Britain, the same. Our experience of democracy for everybody is very, very limited. Yeah. Of course, we have experience of censored democracy for instance, in 17th century after revolution and Cromwell in Great Britain. Yes, but voting rights belong to minority of population.
So you're saying that democracy in the West is not really a very old school, it's not an old tradition, and it's not really democracy as we would like to see. It's just a different name for the same old system, which is a system of aristocrats and elites and powerful people running the system.
Yeah, I can say that social science is relatively young science, and we have more questions than answers about our societies. And it's a serious, it's a very deep, serious question. I don't like to say something bad about countries and so on. I'd like to say that there are a lot of problems and questions, and we need to understand in our society. It's not easy. And there are a lot of books about societies, about democracy, aristocracy, autocracies, and so on, so a lot of names. But what is democracy in reality? The United States president has more rights than a monarch in some countries many years ago. Monarch in Great Britain doesn't have power. In some sense, they have this power, but it's up to debate. Anyway, it's a serious question.
So my question again is that, yes, Russia saw an elimination of culture, which you say cancel culture 100 years ago, after the disintegration of Soviet Union. Was there a resurgence, a revival of Russian culture? Has there been a revival of Russian culture in the last 3 decades?
Yes, of course, we can see it. You are right. But I think renaissance of Russian culture started, I think, definitely after Second World War, earlier, because after death of Stalin, Khrushchev and Brezhnev, leaders of Soviet Union, they this year they made a lot of for Russian culture too. And I remember disputes, discussions about Russian culture in 70s. Yes, and there are a lot of camps, pro-Russian culture writers, for instance, and not anti-Russian culture, more international writers. It was a very interesting time, and it was Renaissance. We can see a lot of fantastic, interesting films about Russia and Soviet Union, filmed in 70s, 80s. It was golden age for Soviet
But
cinema.
what happened to the literature? Because the literature that Russia produced during the revolution or before the revolution, in fact in 20th century, is still being taught in many of the developing countries. For example, in India, it is Russian literature is really seen with very seriousness and is considered quite superior to many other literatures. But we see that there's been either a decline or a vacuum in Russian literature in the 21st century. Are we mistaken, or is it true?
I think, first of all, it's too. You are too direct. Yes, it's simplification a little bit. Excuse me.
That's exactly we want to
yes,
know.
yes. Because, of course, we have literature now. We need more literature, but now we are in transition period. I think it's very important, and many things we can explain using term transition period, because now we can see first generation after collapse of Soviet Union. The first adult people who was born in late Soviet Union and early independent Russia. And now there is new generation, 30, 40 years old, and these new people, they are looking for new identity, new self-understanding, and in some sense, new literature. First of all, there are a lot of good writers in Russia now. You can visit a bookstore and find a huge number of new books. And Victor Pelevin, for instance, very famous Russian, a lot of writers. Yes, now we are thinking and discussing the problem of mass culture, contemporary mass culture in Russia. It's very interesting change. For new cinema, we need mass culture literature and pocket books and something else. Yes, and now I think we are transition period. Soviet type literature, I think has been finished.
Has been finished.
Yes, Soviet type literature, due to age of writers and so on and so on. But at the same time, you can find a new generation. For instance, Evgeny Vodolaskin, Victor Pelevin will be older, and a lot of new writers. From time to time, I check a lot of websites with new writers. Of course, 90%, 99% bullshit. It's terrible. No way to read it. But from time to time, we can find very talented people. I think it's process. At the same time, we have in every country fragmentation of culture.
Yes.
Yes, it's too many sources of information, too many sites, too many bookstores, libraries, digital or real, and so on.
Too much information.
Too much information. Is information abundance, and it's challenge for us, challenge for culture. In 200 years ago, each Russian can read relatively everything.
Yes.
Yes, 3 magazines, 100 books per year, 20 writers, and that's all. Now we have hundreds of writers. We cannot. We need new approach to this culture, to understanding of this culture. It's very interesting and serious question.
So let me interrupt you here. What is, if you were asked, is there a way to describe Russian culture? What is Russian culture?
Russian culture is culture. That's all.
What are the key characteristics, elements of Russian culture? How do you make a distinction between Russian culture against, say, European culture or Western culture?
Russian culture, from my point of view, is a part whole culture. It's about Russian culture is about Judeo-Christian civilization. Majority of Russians, they are not Christians, of course, they're not Orthodox, but you can feel the traditions. I can say that there are common features between Russian and, for instance, Western culture, then differences. Of course, we can distinguish between these cultures, but it's not so important. I can say that some times ago, I compared Russian and American science fiction literature. It's very interesting. They are very close to each other. They say very, very close to each other. United States science fiction, we can find some aggressive foreigners, aliens. In Russian culture, Russian science fiction literature, it's not so easy. Big space world was more friendly, but
wasn't it in fact a Russian Isaac Asimov who was a science fiction writer in the US?
Isaac
Asimov?
Isaac Asimov.
Yeah.
Isaac Asimov is very interesting because he wrote about topic of discussion. He wrote about laws of history and laws of civilization. We started from this dispute about democracy. The problem is not democracy is not problem. The problem is our understanding society. Democracy is only word, and very, very vague and unclear word. But about features, main features of Russian culture. Maybe Russian culture is a little bit more concentrated on a little bit on family values. Russian culture is very feministic because Russian Soviet Union ladies got rights 100 years ago, 50 years before British due to revolution.
Yes.
I have to go in 2-3 minutes.
Okay, so one last question. There is a view that Russian media only peddles propaganda and the Western media speaks truth to power and has a very unbiased, fair view of the world. Is it true that Russian media is all about
No,
propaganda?
it's not true. It's not true totally. I was BBC staff 20 years ago, and I can say that, first of all, for instance, CNN, now it's a mouthpiece of Democratic Party. Unfortunately, it's a main problem of contemporary world. We need journalistic renaissance. We have to restore hierarchy of media because it's crazy situation. We cannot use media for making decision, for instance. It's a real challenge. Russian media, in Russia there are a lot of crazy number of media, and you can find all point of views. There are a lot of criticism from left wing to right wing. You can find everything. Of course, now is a very, very tough situation for media and for journalists. Unfortunately, I am the dean of faculty of creative industries, and we have journalistic programs and so on. So it's a big problem because competition is very high. People unfortunately don't have time to check information. There are a lot of malign manipulation of information. We see it. Unfortunately, a lot of Western media, they are political organizations. They are not media. They play their own role. There is a big question about role of non-government organization, media, in management of the societies. It's a big challenge. Milan Djilas, former vice premier of Yugoslavia, many years ago, during Tito time, he wrote a book called New Ruling Class. He mentions that in Yugoslavia, communist workers, they are nothing. There is a new type. It's a mixture of bureaucracy, intelligence, and so on. So the same situation in Western countries now. There is a capitalist. They not. You can see Trump. He is capitalist and he's Republicans. But the role of non-commercial, non-government organization, media, journalists, very important. And social networks, media is a tool for the manipulation of public opinion. It's a machine to press on societies, on decision makers, on politicians, and so on.
Well, thank you so much.